Poor Maid begged, "Run away." What the billionaire did next shocked everyone. This is a story about decisions made in private that rippled outward until they could no longer be contained. What you're about to hear happened over the course of 14 months in Manhattan, involving a housekeeper named Elara, a tech investor named Rowan Finch, and a man. I've worked in proximity to wealth for most of my adult life, and I've learned that the most important moments are rarely the ones that make headlines. They happen in hallways, in silences, in the 30 seconds before someone decides whether to tell the truth. Here are 2 questions I want you to hold as this story unfolds. First, when someone asks you to trust them, what are they really asking you to carry? And second, if you have the power to intervene in someone's suffering, but intervening might also mean interfering with the lesson they need to learn, what do you do? I'm not here to tell you what to feel about any of this. I'm here to walk you through what happened step by step so that when we reach the end, you can ask yourself what you would have done. It was a Thursday in March when Elara Moss made the phone call that changed the trajectory of her employment, her marriage, and eventually, the way she understood the concept of help. She was standing in the narrow service hallway outside Rowan Finch's kitchen, one hand pressed against the wall to steady herself, the other clutching a phone she had borrowed from another housekeeper because her own had been disconnected 3 days earlier. Her voice was low enough that it barely carried past the laundry room door. She was trying not to cry. She was failing. The person on the other end of the line was her younger sister, Marin, who lived 2 hours north in a town Elara had not visited since their mother's funeral. Marin was asking questions Elara could not answer. How much do you owe? Who are these people? Why haven't you told anyone? Elara's responses came in fragments. She said she didn't know the exact amount anymore. She said they had her signature on documents she didn't remember signing. She said Caleb had told her it was handled, that she needed to have faith that God would provide. But now they were calling her directly and Caleb wasn't answering his phone and she didn't know what to do. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Is it New York, London, or Dublin? Let us know in the comment. And if you are new here, hit the subscribe button. Marin's voice sharpened. She said Elara needed to leave. She said it clearly, without room for negotiation. Run away, she said. Tonight. Before it gets worse. Elara shook her head even though her sister couldn't see her. She said she couldn't leave. She had just been hired. She had signed a contract. This job was the answer to months of prayer. Marin asked her if she understood what was happening. Elara said she did. Marin said she didn't think that was true. The call ended with Elara promising to think about it. She did not promise to leave. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her uniform and stepped back into the kitchen to finish cleaning the counters. Her hands were still shaking. She did not notice that Rowan Finch had been standing in the adjoining hallway for the last 90 seconds, close enough to hear every word. Rowan did not announce himself. He stood very still, holding a folder of acquisition reports he had been reviewing before the sound of quiet crying pulled him out of his office. He was 41 years old, methodical by nature, and deeply uncomfortable with the idea of eavesdropping, but he had learned over the years that information volunteered in moments of crisis was often more accurate than information offered in formal settings. What he heard was not what he expected. He had hired Elara 6 weeks earlier based on a recommendation from his mother's former housekeeper. She had been punctual, thorough, and careful not to overstep. He knew she was married. He knew she attended a church in Brooklyn. He did not know she was afraid. He returned to his office and set the folder down without opening it. He stood by the window and looked out at the city, which stretched below him in its usual indifference. He thought about the phrase "run away." He thought about the fact that Elara had used the word signature in a way that suggested she did not fully understand what had been signed in her name. He thought about the tone of her voice when she mentioned her husband, which was not anger but something closer to confusion, as if she were describing a stranger who had been wearing a familiar face. Rowan made no immediate decision. He believed in allowing people the dignity of managing their own crises unless intervention became unavoidable. But he also believed in patterns, and what he had just overheard suggested a pattern he recognized. Financial abuse wrapped in religious language. Isolation disguised as partnership. Someone convincing someone else that suffering was a test of faith rather than a consequence of betrayal. He did not speak to Elara that day. He let her finish her shift and leave through the service entrance as she always did. But he marked the date in his mental calendar, and he began to pay attention in a way he had not before. He noticed that Elara checked her phone compulsively during breaks. He noticed that she flinched when the lobby intercom buzzed. He noticed that twice in the following week, she arrived to work with shadows under her eyes that suggested she had not slept. 3 weeks passed. Elara continued to work with the same quiet efficiency. She did not ask for time off. She did not complain. She did not mention debt collectors or signatures or fear. Rowan did not press her. He simply watched, and he waited because he knew that people in crisis often cannot ask for help until they are certain they will not be punished for needing it. Then, on a Tuesday evening in late March, two men appeared in the lobby of Rowan's building. They did not use the main elevator. They used the service entrance, which required a code that only staff and residents possessed. The doorman, confused, called up to Rowan's apartment to confirm whether he was expecting maintenance. Rowan said he was not. The doorman described the men. One was in his 50s wearing a black jacket. The other was younger, carrying a manila envelope. They had asked for Elara Moss by name. Rowan told the doorman to send them away. The doorman did. The men left without argument, but they left the envelope with the front desk, marked with Elara's full name and apartment address. Rowan retrieved it an hour later. He did not open it. He simply held it in his hands and felt the weight of it, which was heavier than paper should be. That night, he asked Elara to stay after her shift ended. He did not explain why. He simply said he needed to speak with her, and that it was important, and that she was not in trouble. She nodded and waited in the kitchen, standing because sitting felt presumptuous. When Rowan entered, he was carrying the envelope. He set it on the counter between them and asked her if she knew what it was. She looked at it and said nothing. Her face went pale. Rowan waited. Finally, Elara whispered that she thought she did. Rowan asked her if she wanted to open it. She shook her head. He asked her if she understood that men had come to his building looking for her. She nodded. He asked her if she was safe. She hesitated, and in that hesitation Rowan understood that the answer was no, but that she did not yet have the language to say it out loud. He told her to sit down. She did. He sat across from her, and for the first time since she had been hired, he asked her a question that had nothing to do with her work. He asked her what she needed. Elara looked at him with the expression of someone who had been asked a question in a language she only half understood. She said she didn't know. Rowan said that was all right. He said they would figure it out. But first, he needed to know what was in the envelope, because men who delivered envelopes through service entrances were not men who accepted polite refusals. Elara's hands were shaking again. She reached for the envelope and opened it slowly as if it might detonate. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a payment notice for $17,000, due in 14 days. The second was a photocopy of a loan application bearing her signature, dated 8 months earlier. The third was a letter informing her that failure to pay would result in legal action, wage garnishment, and a lien against any property held in her name. She stared at the documents and said she had never applied for a loan. Rowan asked her if the signature was hers. She looked at it closely and said it looked like hers, but she didn't remember signing it. Rowan asked her who had access to her identification documents. She said only her husband. There was a long silence. Rowan did not fill it. He let Elara sit with the truth that was forming in her mind, because he knew that if he named it for her, she would resist it. Finally, she said Caleb's name. She said it quietly, as if testing the sound of it in the context of betrayal. Rowan asked her where Caleb was now. She said she didn't know. He had stopped coming home 4 nights a week. He said he was staying with a friend from church who needed support. He said it was temporary. Rowan asked her if she believed that. Elara said she wanted to. Rowan nodded. He told her he was going to help her, but that help would require her to be honest with him, and honest with herself about what was happening. She asked him why he would do that. He said because she had asked for mercy when she begged her sister to let her stay, and because mercy without action was just a prettier name for abandonment. Elara started to cry. Rowan let her. When she finally stopped, he told her to go home and to come back the next morning, and that between now and then he would think about what came next. She asked him if she was going to lose her job. He said no. She asked him if he was going to call the police. He said not yet. She asked him what he was going to do. He said he was going to make sure she had options because right now she didn't have any. She left through the service door, and Rowan stood in the kitchen for a long time afterward, holding the envelope and thinking about the gap between what people deserved and what they were willing to ask for. Later that night, Rowan sat in his study and made 2 phone calls. The first was to his attorney. The second was to a private investigator he had worked with on due diligence for acquisitions. He did not tell Elara about either call. He simply set a process in motion, because he had learned that the people who needed help the most were often the least equipped to ask for it correctly. And in Brooklyn, in a small apartment with overdue bills stacked on the kitchen table, Elara sat awake in the dark, waiting for her husband to come home, knowing that when he did, she would have to ask him a question she was terrified to hear answered. If you are still watching, Comment I'm still watching so we will know who is staying through with us. Remember to also hit the like button. The following morning, Elara arrived at Rowan's apartment 20 minutes early. She had not slept. She had rehearsed a resignation speech in her head on the subway, convinced that despite Rowan's reassurances, her employment was already over. People like her did not survive scandals that spilled into their employers' lives. She had seen it happen to others. A housekeeper whose boyfriend stole from a resident. A nanny whose ex-husband caused a scene in the lobby. Both had been let go within days, not out of cruelty but out of liability. Elara expected the same. Instead, Rowan handed her a contract. It was a standard employment agreement but amended. Her hourly wage had been increased by $4. Her schedule had been formalized to guarantee 40 hours per week, with overtime available if she wanted it. There was a clause about health insurance eligibility after 90 days, and another about performance reviews tied to incremental raises. At the bottom, in Rowan's precise handwriting, was a note that read, "This reflects the value of your work, not a response to your circumstances. You were underpaid from the start. I'm correcting that now, asterisk." Elara stared at the document. She said she didn't understand. Rowan said it was simple. He had reviewed comparable wages for her role and realized he had hired her below market rate. This was a correction. It had nothing to do with the envelope or the men or the conversation they'd had the night before. It was simply what should have been offered in the first place. She asked him if this meant she wasn't being fired. Rowan looked genuinely surprised by the question. He said no. He said he had hired her because she was competent and reliable, and nothing about that had changed. What had changed was his awareness of the external pressure she was managing, and his responsibility to make sure that pressure did not prevent her from doing her job safely. Elara signed the contract with shaking hands. She thanked him 3 times. Rowan told her once was sufficient. He said the raise would appear in her next paycheck, which would be processed in 5 days. He also said that if she needed an advance to manage an immediate expense, she could request it through his accountant, and it would be deducted in small increments over time so as not to create additional financial strain. She said she couldn't accept that. He said she could, and that it was a standard benefit he extended to all household staff, which was true, though he had only formalized the policy that morning. He told her to think about it. She nodded. He told her to get back to work. She did. For the next several hours, Elara moved through the apartment in a daze. She dusted shelves she had dusted 2 days earlier. She reorganized pantry items that did not need reorganizing. She was trying to convince herself that what had just happened was real, and that it would not be taken away the moment she made a mistake. At noon, Caleb called. It was the first time he had called her in 6 days. His voice was bright, almost cheerful. He said he missed her. He said he'd been praying about their situation and felt a breakthrough coming. He said he had a meeting later that week with someone from the church who might be able to help with the debt. He asked her how work was going. She said it was fine. He asked if she'd heard anything else from the collectors. She said no, which was technically true, since she had not answered the 3 calls that had come to the borrowed phone that morning. He said that was good. He said God was protecting them. He said she needed to keep trusting the process. She asked him when he was coming home. He said soon. He said he just needed a few more days to finalize some things. She asked what things. He said she didn't need to worry about the details. He said that was his job as her husband, to carry the weight so she didn't have to. Elara wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the documents in the envelope were a misunderstanding, that the signature had been forged by someone else, that Caleb was exactly who he had always presented himself to be, a man of faith navigating a temporary hardship with grace. She wanted to believe that the fear she felt was a test, and that passing the test meant continuing to trust despite the evidence. But there was a new voice in her head now, and it sounded like Rowan's. It was asking her questions she did not want to answer. If Caleb was solving the problem, why were collectors still calling? If the debt was a misunderstanding, why did the signature look exactly like hers? If he was carrying the weight, why did she feel like she was the only one holding anything at all? She told Caleb she had to go. He said he loved her. She said it back because not saying it felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. When she hung up, she stood in Rowan's kitchen and stared at the phone in her hand, wondering when the words "I love you" had started to feel like a plea instead of a promise. That afternoon, another housekeeper arrived for her shift. Her name was Diane, and she had worked for Rowan's mother before transferring to his household when the older woman moved to assisted living. Diane was in her 60s, efficient and observant in the way of people who had spent decades reading the mood of a room before entering it. She noticed immediately that Elara was distracted. She asked if everything was all right. Elara said yes. Diane did not push, but she did say something that stayed with Elara for a long time afterward. She said that Rowan was a fair employer, but fairness did not mean he would tolerate being lied to. She said that if Elara was in trouble, the worst thing she could do was pretend she wasn't, because Rowan could forgive almost anything except dishonesty. Elara asked how she knew that. Diane said she'd seen it happen. A driver who had been with the family for years had lied about a minor car accident to avoid reporting it. Rowan had found out through insurance paperwork. The driver was let go not because of the accident, but because of the lie. Diane said Rowan had even helped the man find another job, but he would not keep him employed in his own household. She said the lesson was simple. If you make a mistake, own it. If you're in trouble, say so. Rowan respected people who respected him enough to tell the truth. Elara absorbed this in silence. She thought about the envelope. She thought about Caleb. She thought about the gap between what she wanted to be true and what she was beginning to suspect actually was. That evening, Caleb came home. It was the first time in a week. He arrived just after 9, smelling faintly of cologne Elara didn't recognize. He kissed her on the forehead and asked what was for dinner. She said she hadn't made anything. He said that was fine, he'd already eaten. He asked if she'd gotten paid yet. She said no, not until Friday. He said that was too bad because he'd been hoping to contribute to an offering at church that weekend. He said the pastor was raising money for a mission trip and he felt called to give. Elara asked him about the meeting he'd mentioned, the one with someone who might help with the debt. Caleb's expression flickered just for a second. He said it had been postponed. He said the person had a family emergency. He said it would be rescheduled soon. Elara asked if he'd spoken to the collectors. He said he had. He said they were being patient. He said everything was under control. She wanted to ask him about the signature. She wanted to ask him about the loan. She wanted to ask him why the documents had her name on them if he was the one managing everything. But the words caught in her throat, because asking meant accusing, and accusing meant shattering the last fragile piece of the life they had built together. So instead she said nothing. And Caleb smiled at her and kissed her again and told her she worried too much. He said faith meant trusting even when you couldn't see the path. He said God had never failed them before and he wouldn't start now. That night, Elara lay awake beside her husband and wondered if faith was supposed to feel this much like fear. The next morning, Rowan asked to speak with her again. This time he did not wait until the end of her shift. He called her into his study mid-morning and closed the door. On his desk was a file folder. He did not open it. He simply told her that he had taken steps to better understand the situation she was navigating, and that what he had learned concerned him. He said that the loan in her name had been taken out by someone with access to her social security number and a copy of her driver's license. He said the lender was a predatory operation with a history of targeting low-income borrowers through third-party brokers. He said the interest rate was illegal in New York State. He said the debt, if left unchallenged, would grow to over $30,000 within a year. Elara felt the room tilt. She asked how he knew all of this. Rowan said he had made inquiries. He did not elaborate. He said what mattered now was not how he knew, but what she was going to do about it. She said she didn't know. He said that was understandable, but that not knowing was not the same as not having options. He said she could dispute the loan on the grounds that the signature was fraudulent. He said she could file a police report. He said she could pursue legal separation from her husband to protect herself from further financial harm. Or, he said, she could do nothing, and let the situation resolve itself in whatever way it was going to. Elara said she couldn't file a police report against her own husband. Rowan said he understood that. He said he was not telling her what to do. He was simply telling her what was possible. He said the choice was hers, but that it needed to be an actual choice, not a default driven by fear. She asked him what he would do. He said that wasn't a fair question because he had never been in her position. But he said that in his experience, people who stole from their partners did not stop until they were forced to stop, and that forcing someone to stop required consequences they could not ignore. Elara left the study feeling as though the ground beneath her had dissolved. She finished her shift mechanically, and when she went home that night, Caleb was not there. He did not call. He did not text. And for the first time, Elara felt something shift inside her that was not quite anger, but was no longer patience. She opened her phone and looked at the number for the debt collector. She did not call, but she saved it. And that small act felt like the beginning of something she could not yet name. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The men came back. This time they did not go to Rowan's building. They went to Elara's apartment in Brooklyn, arriving on a Thursday evening just after sunset. Elara was alone. Caleb had called earlier to say he would be late, which had become his standard refrain. She was folding laundry in the living room when the knock came. It was not loud, but it was deliberate. 3 sharp raps, a pause, then 3 more. She looked through the peephole and saw the same 2 men from the lobby. The older one in the black jacket. The younger one with the envelope. Her first instinct was not to open the door. Her second instinct was fear that not opening it would make things worse. She stood frozen for nearly 30 seconds before the older man spoke through the door. "You said her name. You said they just needed a few minutes? He said it would be easier if she cooperated now rather than later." Elara opened the door but did not unlock the chain. She asked what they wanted. The older man smiled. He said they wanted to help her understand the seriousness of her situation. He said $17,000 was not a small amount, and that the people he worked for were losing patience. He said there were ways to resolve this that didn't involve courts or credit damage, but those ways required good faith effort on her part. She said she was disputing the loan. The man's smile faded slightly. He asked on what grounds. She said the signature might not be valid. He pulled a folded paper from his jacket and held it up to the gap in the door. It was a photocopy of her driver's license, date stamped and notarized. Next to it was her signature on the loan application. The handwriting was identical. He said the signature was valid. He said her husband had co-signed as her spouse, which made them jointly liable. He said it didn't matter whether she remembered signing it or not. What mattered was that her name was on the paperwork, and the debt was enforceable. He said the easiest solution was a payment plan. $500 a month for 3 years. He said if she started now, they could avoid escalation. Elara said she didn't have $500. The man said he understood that was difficult to hear, but it wasn't his problem. He said her employment records showed she worked in Manhattan. He said people who worked in Manhattan usually had access to resources. He suggested she ask her employer for an advance or a loan, or consider picking up additional hours. He said these were solvable problems if she wanted to solve them. She told them to leave. The older man nodded slowly. He said they would leave but they would be back. He said next time they might need to visit her workplace, just to confirm her employment status. He said he hoped it wouldn't come to that. He said it would be embarrassing for everyone involved. Then they left. Elara locked the door and stood with her back against it, breathing hard. She called Caleb. He didn't answer. She called again. No answer. She sent a text that said they had come to the apartment and that she needed him to call her immediately. An hour later, he replied with a short message. *, I'm in a meeting. We'll call soon. Don't worry. Praying for you. *. She waited. He did not call. The next morning, Elara arrived at work and found Rowan waiting for her in the kitchen. He did not ask how she was. He simply said he needed to know if anyone had contacted her in the last 24 hours. She told him about the men. She told him about the photocopy of her license. She told him about the threat to visit her workplace. Rowan's expression did not change, but something in his posture sharpened. He asked if she had reported the visit to the police. She said no. He asked why not. She said because she didn't know if what they did was illegal. He said it was. He said it was harassment and intimidation, and depending on what else they had said, it might also constitute extortion. He told her he was going to review the building's security footage from the day the men had first appeared. He said he wanted to confirm their identities and document their behavior. He said if they approached her again anywhere, she was to call the police immediately and then call him. He wrote down his personal cell phone number on a piece of paper and handed it to her. She had never had it before. She asked him why he was doing this. He said because the alternative was watching her get buried by people who made a living exploiting those who couldn't fight back. He said he had the resources to make this harder for them than it was worth, and he intended to use them. Elara wanted to thank him, but the words felt insufficient. Instead, she asked what she was supposed to do if they contacted her employer. Rowan said they already had, in a sense, because he was her employer and he was aware. He said if they showed up at the building again, security had instructions to deny them entry and contact the police. He said she was not going to lose her job because someone else created a problem in her name. That afternoon, Rowan spent 2 hours in his study reviewing security footage. The cameras in the lobby had captured the men's arrival, their conversation with the doorman, and their departure. He sent the footage to his attorney along with the documents Elara had received. He also sent a formal cease and desist letter to the collection agency, noting that the loan was under dispute and that further contact with his employee would be considered workplace harassment. The attorney called him back within an hour. She said the loan documents showed signs of identity theft, but proving it would require Elara to file a police report and potentially testify against her husband. She said that without Elara's cooperation, the best they could do was force the lender into arbitration and argue that the terms were predatory. She said it would be a long process. She said Elara would need to be prepared for her credit to be damaged in the meantime. Rowan asked what it would take to simply pay off the debt and move on. The attorney said approximately $19,000, accounting for accrued interest and fees. She said paying it would not remove the record of the loan from Elara's credit history, but it would stop the harassment. She also said it would do nothing to address the fact that someone had stolen Elara's identity, and that person could do it again. Rowan thanked her and ended the call. He sat in silence for a long time, weighing options he knew were not his to weigh. He could pay the debt. It would be a rounding error in his quarterly budget. But paying it would also teach Elara that problems could be solved by proximity to wealth rather than by confronting the people who created them. It would let Caleb off the hook. And it would do nothing to prepare Elara for the next crisis, or the one after that. He decided to wait. Not because he was indifferent, but because he believed that some lessons could not be learned secondhand. That evening, Elara finally got Caleb on the phone. She told him everything. She told him about the men at the apartment. She told him about Rowan's intervention. She told him about the cease and desist letter. She told him she needed him to explain what had happened, because nothing he had told her so far made sense. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Caleb sighed. He said he had made a mistake. He said he had taken out the loan because they were behind on rent and he didn't want her to worry. He said he had planned to pay it back before she ever found out. He said things had gotten complicated, and the interest had grown faster than he expected, and now he didn't know how to fix it. Elara asked why he had used her information instead of his own. Caleb said because his credit was already damaged from a previous debt. He said he hadn't wanted to make things worse. He said he thought he was protecting her. She asked him if he understood that he had put her name on a loan without her permission. Caleb said he knew it looked bad, but it wasn't like that. He said they were married. He said what was hers was his and what was his was hers. He said that was what marriage meant. Elara felt something cold settle in her chest. She asked him if he had forged her signature. Caleb said he hadn't forged anything. He said he had signed on her behalf, which was different. He said spouses did that all the time. He said she was making it sound worse than it was. She asked him how much else he had signed on her behalf. He said nothing else. She asked if that was true. He said yes. She asked if he was lying. He said he wasn't. She asked why she should believe him. Caleb's voice changed. He said he didn't appreciate being interrogated. He said he had made a mistake and he was sorry, but she was acting like he had committed a crime. He said he was her husband and she was supposed to support him, not accuse him. He said she was letting her employer put ideas in her head. He said Rowan didn't care about her, he just wanted to control her. Elara said that wasn't true. Caleb asked how she would know. He said men like Rowan didn't help people unless there was something in it for them. He said she needed to be careful because people like that always had an agenda. He said she was being naive. She hung up on him. It was the first time she had ever done that. She sat on the couch in the dark and felt the full weight of the last 8 months collapse onto her at once. The late rent. The disconnected phone. The borrowed money from her sister that had never been repaid. The nights Caleb hadn't come home. The excuses that had seemed reasonable at the time but now felt like a script. She thought about the phrase "on her behalf." She thought about the fact that he had said it so casually, as if stealing someone's identity was just another form of intimacy. She thought about the way he had turned the conversation away from his actions and toward her reaction, as if the problem was not what he had done but that she had noticed. For the first time, Elara allowed herself to think the word she had been avoiding. Abuse. Not the kind that left bruises. The kind that left you wondering if you were crazy for feeling hurt. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table and made a list of every financial document she could remember signing in the last 2 years. Then she made a list of every document Caleb had told her not to worry about. The second list was longer. The next morning, she went to work and asked Rowan if she could take him up on his offer to connect her with his attorney. He said yes. He scheduled the meeting for that afternoon. And in Brooklyn, Caleb sat in a friend's apartment and told himself that Elara would come around. He told himself she was just scared. He told himself that faith meant trusting him even when she didn't understand. He told himself he was still in control. He was wrong. If you're interested in what happened next, comment part 2 and don't forget to turn on notifications because what Elara did will shock you. What will you do if you're Elara? Rate this story on a scale of 0 to 10. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss part 2. Thanks for watching and never take those who stick with you through things and thick for granted. You will always need them.